Owen had just turned 30, living a monotonous life that revolved around the glow of a computer screen and the four walls of an old wooden house. He lived with his younger sister Hannah, 24, an art student who spent nearly all her free time at her boyfriend's place in the neighboring city. The house was too big for the two of them, and for just one person. It became a vast, cold emptiness. Owen didn't hate solitude, but he often felt as if the house was slowly absorbing his own sense of emptiness, transforming silence into a heavy, lurking presence. Whenever Hannah was away, Owen would get the impression that every object in the house shifted slightly, holding its breath, waiting. That evening was typical. Rain drizzled steadily, tapping against the old metal awning. At dusk, Hannah texted, "Made it to Tyler's. I won't be back tonight. Lock up, okay?" Relief passed through him. He didn't have to worry about her coming home late, but it was quickly replaced by that familiar chill of loneliness. Colder than the air outside, Owen went to the kitchen, made himself a meager dinner, then retreated to the living room. He had a small ritual to calm himself: horror movies. He believed that willingly immersing himself in artificial fear would help him control the irrational anxieties that gnawed at him. Tonight's choice was a film about a family trapped in a haunted house, a classic trope, but always effective. He turned off the overhead light, leaving only the flickering blue of the TV and the faint glow from the hallway. Darkness became both his companion and his stalker. The corners of the room seemed to stretch deeper, swallowing the weak light from the screen. The movie ended around midnight, leaving him with frayed nerves and the lingering unease that horror films were designed to spark. He stretched, trying to shake the sense of being watched, then performed his nightly ritual, checking the front door, the back door, and every window on the first floor. When he climbed the stairs, the wooden steps groaned beneath him, each creak loud enough to fracture the silence. Owen entered his room and instinctively locked the door, a small but crucial act, as if drawing a physical boundary between himself and the rest of the house. He lay down, tried reading a few pages to clear his mind, but images of darkness and groaning sounds from the movie clung to him. His body was tired, but his nerves stayed wide awake. He drifted into a shallow sleep for about 45 minutes. Suddenly, his eyes flew open. He was instantly awake. No sound, no nightmare, just a jolt of awareness. Sharp and threatening, he glanced at the digital clock on the nightstand. 1:07 a.m. before he could reason why he had woken. It came, not a noise, but a voice. It was low, muffled, strangely echoing from somewhere downstairs. "Owen?" He froze. His heart leapt, then pounded so violently he could feel it reverberate in his chest. The voice, he knew it instantly. It was Hannah's, weak, tired, almost like a moan. Impossible. Hannah had texted. She was at Tyler's. Owen's body stiffened under the blanket. He waited, praying his ears had betrayed him. "Owen, are you there?" This time, clearer, as if the speaker stood at the foot of the stairs. Maybe in the kitchen, where the cold tile floor was. Logic clawed at him. Maybe Hannah had argued with Tyler and come home without telling him. But then, why hadn't she turned on the lights? Why hadn't she knocked on his door? And more disturbing, why did her voice sound wrong? Missing its usual playful, teasing edge, hollow instead, as though echoing from far away. Concern outweighed fear. If it was Hannah, maybe something was wrong. Owen slid out of bed, feet hitting the icy wooden floor. He didn't turn on his lamp, didn't want the light to give him away. He crept to the door, his trembling hand brushing the cold brass knob. Slowly, carefully, he turned it, avoiding the squeal of the hinges. The hallway lay in darkness. The small window at its end reflected only faint moonlight through heavy clouds, twisting shadows into warped shapes. He walked past the spare room, past Hannah's room, door shut. As always, he made himself note this detail. At the stairs, he paused. That spot was the darkest of all, a black void that swallowed sound and sight. He descended, each step a negotiation with fear, the wood whining underfoot like a complaint. At the ground floor, he stood before the living room threshold. The dark here was heavier, thicker. He could smell the old musty damp of the house. He went straight to the kitchen. There was a light switch there. He pressed his ear to the silence. Nothing. No sound. No reply. Sweat ran down his temple. He had to end this. He raised his hand. Click. The fluorescent light flared, harsh and cold. Owen squinted, scanning every corner. He checked under the table, behind the fridge, even opened cupboards. Nothing. No sign of entry. No wet coat on the floor. No muddy footprints. The house was as empty as when he'd gone to bed. Relief mixed with a deeper dread. Just nerves, he told himself. The movie, the tension, the shallow sleep. He turned, trying to convince himself it was only his mind playing tricks. Then a thought hit him. What if someone was hiding in the living room? Or worse, what if it wasn't someone at all, and it was toying with him? The uncertainty was unbearable. He faced the dark hall leading to the stairs, the place where the voice had called him. He drew in a deep breath, gathering every ounce of fear and anger into a single shout. Hannah, are you here? Stop this right now. Answer me. His voice thundered through the house, bouncing off wooden walls, fading into a mournful echo. Silence followed, so sharp it hurt his ears. He stood waiting for an apology, a laugh from his sister. Neither came. Instead, there was a sound. Bang. It wasn't from downstairs. It wasn't beneath him. It was above him. The kitchen floor trembled slightly, as though something massive had slammed onto the floorboards above, like a wardrobe crashing over, like a pile of heavy books toppling. The sound had come from Hannah's room, the door he had seen shut. The room he knew was empty. The difference between the weak, pleading voice and this violent, physical noise was a horrifying confirmation. The voice had been an invitation. The crash was an answer. All thoughts of illusion, of nightmares, obliterated. Something was upstairs. Survival instinct took over. He didn't think, he ran. He tore up the stairs 2 at a time, feet hammering the old wood, each impact a gunshot in the stillness. Only one thought filled his mind, his room. He lunged inside, slammed the door, the frame rattling under the force. He locked it, then slid the extra bolt he had installed months ago. Leaning against the door, sweat soaking his back, he gasped like a man sprinting for his life. Then came the sound. Not another crash. This time, it was dragging, slow, deliberate, from Hannah's room, the creak of floorboards under something heavy moving. Drag, painfully slow, painfully intentional. And then, it stopped. Right outside his door. Owen stood frozen, eyes wide, body rigid. He could feel the silence pressing against him. An oppressive will in the air. He knew it was there, just on the other side of the wooden barrier. Waiting. It had called his name. He had answered. And now, it had found him. Only when the first weak light of dawn seeped through his curtains, the gray, fragile morning of Maine, did Owen dare to relax. He didn't know how long he had stood like that. Every muscle ached, but fear had kept him awake. The clock read 7:15 a.m. As daylight grew stronger, chasing away deceptive shadows, he unlocked the door and stepped into the hallway. Everything was eerily normal. No cracks, no fallen furniture. He walked to Hannah's room. He pushed the door open. Empty. Bed neatly made. Desk tidy. Floor spotless. No sign anything heavy had ever fallen. The normalcy made his terror sharper. Later, Owen went down to the kitchen. Everything was in place. The switch he clearly remembered flipping was now off. When Hannah came home at 9 a.m., she found him sitting on the couch, hands wrapped around a cup of cold coffee, eyes distant. She immediately noticed his haggard look. "Owen, what happened? You look like you haven't slept in a week." He told her, every detail, the voice like hers, his desperate search, the terrifying crash from her room. Hannah listened skeptically at first, but then worry crept into her face. She repeated firmly, "I was at Tyler's all night. My phone died so I couldn't call you. But I swear I never came home." The last thread of logic Owen had been holding onto snapped. It hadn't been Hannah. It had mimicked her voice. But the worst part wasn't the voice. It was the response. It had called his name. He had answered, and it had replied, with a sound no hallucination could make. A physical crash from a sealed, empty room. Proof that it was real. Proof that it had heard him. Owen never felt safe in that house again. He couldn't bear being alone at night. Whenever Hannah stayed away, he drove to a 24-hour cafe in town or stayed at the office until morning. He knew he had made a grave mistake. He had answered. He had confirmed to whatever lurked in the dark that, in that moment, he was utterly alone and vulnerable. The house, with its vast silence, became a trap, where imagined sounds swelled to madness, and impossible sounds proved themselves real. Within a few months, Owen and Hannah moved out. But even in their bright, noisy downtown apartment, whenever Owen woke in the night, he instinctively checked the clock. And he always wondered, if he hadn't answered that night, would it have kept calling, or would it have silently climbed the stairs? It was the largest house on their street, an old 3-story Victorian in the quiet suburbs of upstate New York, where thick maple trees blotted out the summer sky and winter winds howled through the cracks in the windows. 10-year-old Liam often felt lost in the vastness of the house his parents called their nest. But that night, the size of it didn't feel safe. It felt like an emptiness ready to swallow him whole. The evening began in chaos. The shrill ringing of the phone, his mother's anguished scream, and then the sharp clatter of keys falling onto the hardwood floor. Jacob, Liam's 16-year-old brother, had been hit by a car while riding his bike home from basketball practice. Everything happened too fast, a whirlwind of fear and despair. After a few stunned, horrifying seconds, Liam's parents rushed out the door, his mother clutching her coat with tear-reddened eyes, his father barely able to breathe. They forgot about Liam. He stood frozen at the bottom of the stairs, watching the panic unfold. When the family car screeched out of the driveway, its headlights fading into the misty drizzle, Liam realized he was alone. Darkness fell over the house quicker than usual, or maybe it only felt that way to a 10-year-old left behind in a cavernous, empty home. It was past 10 o'clock. Liam tried to fill the silence by turning on one lamp after another, scattering dim yellow islands of light across the stillness. The house, normally alive with Jacob's blaring rock music or his father's TV shows, now sat terrifyingly silent. The silence wasn't just the absence of sound, it was the absence of life. Liam felt as though invisible eyes were watching him from every shadow, every dusty portrait, every curtain swaying by the windows. Upstairs, the fear grew heavier. He passed Jacob's room, its door ajar, the unmade bed still rumpled, his basketball jacket hanging over the chair. The emptiness was unbearable. Liam retreated into his own room, closing the door behind him. He lay on his bed, trying to close his eyes, but his mind kept replaying his mother's terrified face. He told himself everything would be fine, that his parents would come home soon, that Jacob would recover. But each time he shut his eyes, he saw the car and the darkness. Time dragged on, marked only by the grandfather clock in the living room, tick-tock, tick-tock, each strike like a hammer driving deeper into his solitude. He heard the floorboards creak, the old heater groan as it flicked on and off. Sounds he never noticed when adults were home now felt like ominous signs. By nearly 1 in the morning, Liam was still awake, curled tightly beneath his blanket, hovering in that fragile state between exhaustion and dread. He was jolted by a sound that cut the silence like a blade. Click, the front door lock being gently turned. At first Liam thought it was the wind. But no, the sound was too clear, too deliberate. The door opened slightly, the hinges giving a faint metallic whine, then shut again almost noiselessly. Liam's heart stopped, his body froze stiff. He knew it wasn't his parents. When they returned, they'd slam the door, call his name, rush inside. Never this quiet. He lay still, straining to hear footsteps, not one, but 3 distinct sets of heavy footsteps padding across the carpeted hallway. They were in the living room. All thoughts of ghosts or monsters vanished, replaced by a colder, more primal terror. Intruders. Liam slid silently out of bed. He didn't dare turn on the light. Light would make him a target. He crept to his door and opened it just a crack, peering into the dark hallway. From there he could see the landing overlooking the spiral staircase and part of the living room below. Through the narrow gap, he saw them, 3 tall figures standing in the living room. They weren't in a rush, all 3 dressed in dark clothes. What unsettled him most was their height, unnaturally tall, thin, standing shoulder to shoulder like living pillars of stone in the dim glow of the street lamp seeping through the curtains. One of them swept a small flashlight over the bookshelves and cabinets. Liam swallowed hard. His throat was dry. He couldn't go back to bed. He couldn't stay here. He needed a real hiding place. His room had an old oak wardrobe built into the wall, deep and shadowed, where his parents stored winter coats and boxes. It was his only chance. Moving like a snake, he slithered across the floor, his heartbeat pounding louder than any sound. He pulled the wardrobe door open. Its hinges gave a faint, icy creak. He ignored it, squeezing inside. He pushed through layers of coats and pulled the door shut behind him. The darkness inside was absolute. The smell of mothballs and old wood filled his nose. Liam curled up among the heavy fabrics, clamping both hands over his mouth, forcing his breath to slow. The footsteps had started climbing the stairs. Creak, creak, creak. No longer stealthy, the three men were methodically checking each room. Liam heard Jacob's door open, heavy footsteps pacing inside, then a sharp clatter, maybe a drawer yanked out. Then they moved on to his father's study at the end of the hall. Then silence. A silence so deep Liam's ears began to buzz. One set of footsteps returned, stopping, right outside his room. His bedroom door swung open. Not quietly, suddenly, banging lightly against the wall. Footsteps entered, the soft scrape of fabric, steady breathing, the squeak of his bed frame as the covers were yanked back. Rustle. Someone was searching. Liam dug his nails into his palms. Tears burned his eyes, but he didn't dare cry. Not a sob, not a breath. His heart felt ready to explode. He had to stay silent. The rummaging stopped. Footsteps shifted closer. Then, stillness. The intruder was standing right in front of the wardrobe. Liam could feel the heat of a body through the wood. He shut his eyes. He prayed. For the first time in his life, he prayed. The doorknob turned. Creak. The wardrobe door opened. Liam stared into blackness. But he knew. A tall figure blocked the dim light from the hallway. Staring straight at him, the intruder said nothing. No gasp. No sound. Only silence. Heavy, crushing silence, broken only by the frantic tick-tock of the grandfather clock downstairs. Time seemed to stop. 10 seconds. 15. 20 horrifying seconds where a 10-year-old boy faced the deadliest silence of his life. Did they see him? Why weren't they saying anything? Why weren't they moving? Then, as slowly as it had opened, the wardrobe door closed. Click. The footsteps retreated. Quicker now. The bedroom door shut. Harder this time. Liam heard the other two men in the hallway. Their muffled voices. Then the heavy footsteps of all three descending the stairs. Liam didn't move. 10 minutes. 20 minutes. He stayed crouched, terrified it was a trick, that they'd return. Only when he heard the familiar screech of his parents' car outside. Headlights flashing past the curtains. Did he dare push open the wardrobe? He bolted downstairs. His parents were just coming in. Exhausted, eyes swollen. But Jacob was safe, battered, with a broken leg, but alive. When his mother saw him, she collapsed into his arms, sobbing with guilt. "Oh God, Liam, we forgot you. I'm so sorry, sweetheart." As his father comforted her, he noticed something. The front door was ajar, the lock broken. They turned on the living room lights. His father's old flashlight was missing. His mother's wallet was gone from the coffee table. The room had been lightly rifled. But the most important thing was missing: the emergency cash and his mother's jewelry box. They never knew Liam had been home. They never knew he'd witnessed everything. They never knew he'd hidden in the wardrobe, inches away from the intruder. He didn't tell them. He couldn't. How could he explain those 20 seconds of silence? The silence filled with intent. The realization that the intruder had seen him, had known he was there, and, for some reason, chose to let him live. From that night on, Liam never felt safe alone again. Every creak of the floorboards brought back the icy touch of that doorknob. The towering shadow in the dark. What haunted him wasn't the missing valuables, but the knowledge that he had been exposed to mortal danger and spared. That choice was more terrifying than violence, because it made him a living secret, a marked target that the darkness had seen and remembered. He knew he'd escaped, but he always felt that part of his soul was still frozen in that wardrobe. On that night of terror, Ethan was only 14, an age old enough to think of himself as grown but far too young to face real fear. He was home alone. His mother, a nurse, had just started her night shift and wouldn't be back until 6 the next morning. It was a familiar arrangement, but never a comfortable one. The night had begun with warmth and normalcy. Molly, his unofficial girlfriend, had stopped by to do homework and watch a movie. Around 10:30, Molly said goodbye, her chirping voice fading along with the sound of her bike tires rolling off the cobblestone street. Ethan slammed the door shut, and the familiar silence of an adult-less house fell over him again. He went to his bedroom on the ground floor, the one that looked directly out onto the backyard and the patio set on the wooden deck. Ethan tried to focus on his computer game, but the solitude gnawed at him, sharpening his senses in an uncomfortable way. He heard the wind brushing through the bushes, the compressor of the refrigerator humming from the kitchen. He knew his mother had carefully locked both the front and back doors before leaving for work. But that didn't stop the feeling of vulnerability from pressing down on him. Around midnight, just as he was struggling to finish a mission in the game, a sound pulled his eyes away from the screen. Creak. It was the sound of a patio chair being dragged across the wooden deck. Ethan frowned. The wind? But there was no strong wind that night. The sound was too distinct, too deliberate, as though someone had just sat down. He turned off his computer screen. The room sank into a dim shadow. Slowly, he stood and crept toward the window. Carefully, he lifted the curtain just enough to peek through. The faint glow of the streetlight behind the house spilled dimly onto the deck. And he saw him. A tall man was sitting in the white wooden chair where Molly had been just hours earlier. He wasn't a neighbor. He wasn't anyone Ethan's mother knew. Ethan had never seen him before. The man wore a dark baseball cap that hid part of his face, and a thick coat, though August nights were still warm. He sat with his back to the yard but his face turned toward the house. More specifically, he was staring directly at Ethan's bedroom window. A cold current shot down Ethan's spine. All the false calmness vanished. Had the man seen him? Surely not. Ethan had only cracked the curtain a sliver. But the man was sitting there, in the chair, as if waiting. Ethan let the curtain fall, making no sound. He backed away until his spine pressed against the cold wall. He couldn't breathe. Who was this man? What was he doing there? He waited a minute, 2 minutes. Nothing happened. Maybe the man would get up and leave. Ethan dared to pull the curtain again. Just a finger's width. The man was still there. Still sitting. Still unmoving. Then something happened that twisted Ethan's insides into knots. The man didn't move, but his shoulders began to rise and fall rhythmically, as if he were laughing. Ethan heard no laughter, only the rise and fall of the shoulders. But then a sound reached him, faint through the glass, a thin, wheezing whistle. Not a tune, not music, just air hissing through teeth. A sound not cheerful but sinister and dragging. He was laughing. He was whistling. He knew Ethan was there. 15 minutes passed like 15 hours. The man remained. The whistling rasp cut through the silence. Ethan stayed frozen, a 14-year-old boy trapped in the darkness of his room, staring at the stranger stalking him. His phone lay on the desk. He wanted to call the police, but the thought of speaking, of making a sound, of confirming that he was home alone, paralyzed him. His mother always said, if anything seems wrong, call 911 immediately. Ethan, but fear had frozen his judgment. Suddenly, the whistling stopped. The man stood up. He no longer looked up at the window. He turned his back and walked straight toward the rear of the house, where the kitchen and laundry room door stood. A second later, Ethan heard the back door slam against its frame. Bang! The man was trying to break in. Ethan gasped. He couldn't run. He couldn't scream. He slid beneath his bed, into the dust and darkness that offered only false comfort. A pause. Silence. The noise stopped. Had he given up? But then, sounds from the front of the house. The rattle of a doorknob. He had moved to the front door. He was testing the lock, shaking it hard. Ethan could hear the knob twisting violently, the wood straining under pressure. The man wasn't trying to be quiet anymore. He wanted in. The pounding went on for about a minute. A brutal assault on the physical safety of the house. Each thud on the door was like a hammer strike against Ethan's nerves. Finally, the noise stopped again. This time, the silence was absolute. Ethan lay under the bed, smothered by the heavy stillness. He didn't know if the man was still there. He didn't dare move. The fear had grown so immense it pushed him past the point of tears. He waited. 10 minutes. 20. Only when the familiar rumble of his mother's car echoed down the cul-de-sac and her headlights swept across the windows did he crawl out. His mother entered, exhausted from her shift, but quickly sensed something was wrong. "Ethan, why are the lights off? Why isn't the front deadbolt locked?" His father had left earlier. Before she secured the main lock, she had forgotten to slide the secondary bolt. Ethan pointed to the window. His voice barely audible. He told her everything. The chair. The man. The whistling. The pounding at the doors. She checked. The patio was empty. The white wooden chair had been moved slightly out of place. But there were no clear signs left behind. She hugged him tight, but soon her worry turned to anger. "I told you what to do if something happens. Ethan, call 911. Why didn't you call the police? You could have been in danger." She was angry at his weakness, at his failure to protect himself. But that did nothing to calm Ethan's terror. He couldn't explain. Fear itself had stopped him from calling. Because making that call would mean admitting, out loud, that he was alone and completely defenseless. From that night on, the white chair was put away in the shed. Ethan never looked out his window at night again. And whenever his mother worked the night shift, he wrestled with the feeling that someone was out there on the patio, waiting for him to glance outside, and ready to whistle that sinister tune in the darkness. The scariest truth wasn't that the man had come. It was that he had sat there, waiting, knowing Ethan would look. Jess's family ranch sat deep in a remote valley in eastern Wyoming, where the night wasn't just dark but swallowed the very stars. And silence pressed so heavily it made your ears ring. Jesse was 16, and being home alone for a week at a time was nothing unusual whenever his parents had to head into the big city for farm business. He was used to solitude, and his only protection came in the form of an old hunting rifle and bear. The massive, loyal German shepherd, Bear never barked without a reason, and just having him nearby felt like armor around Jess's nerves. It was a Wednesday night. The last drizzle of the season had finally stopped, leaving the air thick with the smell of damp earth and dry grass. Jesse lounged on the old couch in the living room, half watching a baseball rerun on TV. The clock was nearing midnight. The house, sprawling and weathered, had its own creaks and groans. But Jesse had learned to tune them out. It wasn't the house's usual noises that made him pause. Bear was curled up at Jess's feet, his head resting across the boy's shoes. Suddenly, he froze. No bark, just a slow, deliberate lift of his head, ears snapping upright, golden eyes narrowing. Every muscle in his body went taut in a way that made Jess's skin crawl. Bear wasn't looking at him. He was locked on the thick oak front door. He didn't move, but a low, rolling growl, like stones grinding together, started deep in his chest. It was raw, primal, and Jesse had never heard anything like it before. Bear knew something was there. Jesse clicked the TV off. The screen went black, reflecting the pale, frightened face staring back. Silence. Just Bear's steady, vibrating growl and the thunder of his own heartbeat. Out here, in this isolated valley, if Bear growled like that, it wasn't an animal. He rose carefully. Fear coiled in his stomach. But life on the ranch had taught him never to panic. He reached for his father's deer rifle mounted above the fireplace. The cold steel against his palm steadied him. If only slightly. He checked the rounds without thinking. He motioned for Bear to fall back. The dog hesitated, then obeyed. Step by step, Jesse edged toward the front door, moving as though walking across thin ice. He unlatched the deadbolt, keeping the rifle tight against his shoulder. It was insane. He knew that, but he couldn't just let his imagination torture him. The door creaked open. Damp air and the scent of grass swept in. Jesse swept his flashlight across the porch. Nothing. The wooden planks stretched empty. Darkness spilling across the wide yard. Crickets hummed. The trees were still. He frowned, heat of embarrassment creeping into his face. Maybe it was just a raccoon. Or a fox. He almost cursed Bear for spooking him. He stepped onto the threshold. That's when his eyes, by sheer accident, flicked downward. At the edge of the porch, right beside the wooden stairs leading to the yard, something was curled up. A man. He wore a dark hoodie. Body balled up so tightly he was nearly unrecognizable. Knees pressed hard into his chest. He wasn't moving, wasn't breathing heavy, just utterly still. The picture of pure concealment. He hadn't been there when Jesse swept the flashlight. But now he was. He had moved into position while Jesse was distracted. The blood in Jesse's veins turned to ice. Every muscle locked. This wasn't some petty thief. This was a predator waiting. Pure survival instinct told Jesse not to make a sound. He didn't slam the door. He didn't yell. He slowly backed away, rifle held steady, careful not to bump it against anything. He shut the front door as gently as possible, leaving the bolt unlocked. Then Jesse did something he never imagined he would do. He slipped silently through the darkened kitchen, bear padding close behind, the growl still rumbling like a motor in his throat. At the back door, Jesse peered through the small window. The man was still there, curled like part of the porch itself. Waiting. Jesse slid the steel latch into place. Then he checked the cellar door. Then the windows one by one, pulling curtains, locking each one tight. Finally, he returned to the front and slid the heavy deadbolt home. The house was now a sealed box of steel and wood. Jesse hadn't confronted the stranger. He'd locked him out, trapped him between the porch and the endless dark. He dialed 911. His voice shook as he tried to give the dispatcher the remote ranch's address. "There's a man hiding on my porch. He won't leave. I'm home alone." It took nearly 40 minutes for deputies Miller and Jones to arrive. Their red and blue lights the only color in the suffocating Black Valley. From his bedroom window, Jesse watched them sweep flashlights across the porch. Beneath chairs, behind planters, they circled the house, checked the cellar doors, searched the nearby brush. Nothing. Miller banged on the front door. "Hey kid, sheriff's office. We checked, place is clear." He probably bolted when he saw our headlights. Jesse, pale and trembling, cracked the door open, bear glued to his side. Finally quiet. I saw him." Jesse stammered. He was curled up, right at the edge. Miller sighed, the sound heavy with fatigue. "We didn't see anything, son. Maybe just a drifter looking for shelter from the rain. You did the right thing calling us. Lock up tight. Try to get some sleep." The deputies drove off. Jesse locked the door again. But relief never came. He knew what he'd seen. The man hadn't run. Where had he gone? He couldn't have vanished into thin air. The rest of the night was torture. Jesse never slept. He sat in the living room, rifle across his lap, every groan of the house making him jump. Dawn crept in with pale yellow light and a sharp chill. The fear dulled but twisted into something deeper. Jesse moved to the kitchen for coffee. His mother's words echoed in his head, everything in its place. His father had sharpened their professional chef's knives just the night before. He reached the knife block. One was missing. The longest, sharpest chef's knife. Gone. Every drop of blood in Jesse's body seemed to drain. If the man had run, why was the knife missing? That meant he had come inside. Maybe when Jesse slipped out the back. Or maybe after he'd locked the front but before the back was secured. Or, far worse, through a way Jesse hadn't thought of at all. Maybe he'd been inside all night. Jesse dropped the coffee cup into the sink, not even watching it shatter. He called 911 again. His voice this time wasn't shaky. It was cold with terror. "You need to come back. A knife is missing. He's inside." Miller and Jones returned, irritated but more serious now. Jesse pointed to the empty slot in the block. "This one. It was here last night. He didn't run. He's here." The deputies searched thoroughly this time. Ground floor, attic, every room. Jesse followed close, bear glued to his leg, growling low, eyes scanning the floorboards. Jones headed down to the basement, just a cramped, musty storage space for canned food and garden tools. "Anything?" Miller called from above. A pause. Then Jones's voice, low and tight. "I've got something." Jesse and Miller rushed down. The basement air was damp, cold, smelling of mold. Beneath the rickety wooden stairs, half hidden under an old tarp, was a dark hollow. And inside it, curled in on himself, was the man. He hadn't run. He had been there the entire time. Silent, waiting. In his hands, clutched tight, was the missing knife. The man didn't fight. He was dragged out within seconds. Exhaustion from hours of hiding heavier than any rage. Up close, he was gaunt, middle-aged, with hollow, vacant eyes. He'd slipped in through a small laundry room window Jesse hadn't thought to check. Jesse just stared at the knife that had been in the stranger's grip. Only feet from his bedroom. All night long, if the man had wanted, he could have ended everything right after Jesse first called the cops. But he hadn't. He'd chosen to stay, to wait, to lie hidden beneath the stairs, knife in hand, biding his time until Jesse let his guard drop. The real horror wasn't the break-in. It was the man's intent, the patience, the silence, the way he had taken that knife like a trophy. Jesse had spent the night not alone, but with a predator beneath his floorboards. From that night forward, every time Bear growled in his sleep, Jesse knew it wasn't just a dream. Safety, in that lonely ranch house, had only ever been an illusion. Daniel, 28, was a data analyst who found comfort in the quiet rhythm of his work. He had lived in this townhouse for 3 years, and the only thing that unsettled him was the house next door. It was sealed off, pitch black, abandoned, and its silence felt like a physical weight, broken only by the wind whistling through its shattered windows. Daniel's office was upstairs, pressed against the shared wall. He had grown accustomed to this wall being the thin boundary between life and architectural decay. That night, a summer storm pounded Savannah, rain hammering down in heavy sheets. It wasn't just background noise, it was a curtain, a conspirator of the dark. Daniel worked late, focused on finishing a project. The glow of his computer screen was the only light in the narrow room. Fatigue tugged at him, but the silence left him unnervingly alert. Around 11 o'clock, the noises began. Thud. A heavy, jarring bang came from the shared wall. Daniel froze. He stopped typing, held his breath, and listened. This wasn't wood expanding or water pipes knocking. It was the sound of something solid, directionless, colliding with force. Clink. Then came the scrape of metal against metal, faint and uneven, like someone rummaging through an old toolbox. All of it from the abandoned house next door. Daniel shrugged to himself. Probably a big rat, or maybe the storm had loosened a board and sent it crashing down. Logic was his shield, but his body remained tense. That house had been empty too long. It shouldn't make noises. The rain grew louder, swallowing most small sounds, but those random, disjointed noises still threaded through the wall. After 15 minutes of this chaotic racket, an unnatural silence dropped. The house next door went completely still. Only the drumming rain remained. Daniel let out a slow breath, telling himself it was over. He shut down his computer and stood, ready to head downstairs for bed. That's when it came. Slam. A door banged open and shut with such violent force that Daniel's entire townhouse shuddered. It wasn't his door. It was the back door of the abandoned house. The sound was sharp, decisive, carrying weight, like someone had thrown their whole body into stopping a pursuit. Daniel knew this was wrong. A sealed door couldn't just open and slam shut. Someone was inside that house, and Daniel was only separated from them by a single, thin brick wall. He stood in the middle of his office, heart pounding against his ribs. He didn't dial 911 right away. He wanted to hear more, to make sure he wasn't imagining things. He didn't want to sound paranoid, reporting noises from an abandoned property. Slowly, each step heavy and loud in the unnatural stillness. He descended the staircase. He reached the dark living room. He didn't turn on the light. Darkness was his ally now, a camouflage. He moved toward the kitchen, where the back door and the landline phone waited. And then, it broke into his space. A whistle, not the wheeze of wind through cracks. A tune, real, deliberate, slow, soft, carried with strange resonance. And it wasn't coming from the shared wall. It was coming from inside Daniel's own house. The icy fear in his chest flared into raw terror. Someone had crossed over. Daniel froze in the kitchen doorway, rooted to the spot. The whistle drifted through the dark, a mournful, old-fashioned melody echoing in the air of his home. Where was he? Daniel leaned, inch by inch, to peer into the living room. The wide space lay shrouded in darkness, only touched by the faint glow of a street lamp bleeding through the curtains. And there, he saw him. A tall, gaunt man sat in Daniel's leather armchair. The same chair Daniel used to read in. The stranger leaned back, facing the black screen of the big television. His face was swallowed by shadow. He sat perfectly still, staring into the dark reflection of the TV, staring at his own reflection. The whistling came from him. A steady, gentle stream of sound. He was at ease in Daniel's living room, as if it had always been his place. Daniel's eyes locked on the man's hand. It rested lightly on his knee. In it, he held something dark, short, heavy, a revolver, old, but unmistakable. The man never turned toward Daniel. He didn't appear to be waiting. He was simply inhabiting the space, enjoying the stillness, the solitude, the whistle, and the black screen before him. Daniel's mind shut down. Logic evaporated. There was no shame, no second guessing, only instinct. He stepped back, turned, not running, walking, carefully, silently, moving toward the back door. He unlatched it, opened it, and slipped out into the storm. Barefoot, no coat, rain hammered him as he sprinted across the soaked yard, clambered over the rotting fence, and tore into the dark alley. He ran and ran until he reached the corner under the brightest street lamp. His feet numb, breath breaking apart in ragged gasps. He pulled out his phone. 911. Within 5 minutes, sirens split the storm. Daniel stood beneath the streetlight, pointing a shaking finger toward his house. He's in the living room. He has a gun. He came from the abandoned house next door. Police swarmed the property, flashlights cutting through the wet dark. Guns drawn. Daniel stayed behind the line of squad cars, trembling not from cold but from the horror of release. Minutes later, 2 officers escorted the man outside. He didn't resist. He was calm, almost detached, surrounded by flashing red and blue. As they passed, the man paused. He didn't speak. He only smiled, a warped, crooked smile without warmth, just emptiness. Handcuffed, he was led into the patrol car. Daniel stared at him. His face was gaunt, unrecognizable, drained of life, as if he hadn't slept in days. Police later searched the abandoned house. The back door was wide open, rain and wind rushing through. The next morning, they told Daniel the man had no ID, no name. He hadn't spoken a single word. He refused to cooperate. No record of him existed in their systems. He appeared unstable, mentally fractured. They believed he had slipped into the abandoned house, using the storm to mask his movements, then crossed into Daniel's home through a broken basement window he'd never noticed. Daniel moved out within a week. He couldn't bear the thought of a stranger sitting in his chair, whistling in the dark. It wasn't the gun that haunted him most. It was that crooked smile. And the silence. The man hadn't wanted money. He hadn't wanted to steal. What he wanted was intrusion. To exist in another person's solitude. Daniel relocated to a high-rise apartment. No shared walls. No shadowed yards. But every time he heard a soft whistle in the city, that old townhouse returned to him. The image of the man, in darkness, staring into nothing, whistling his hollow tune. Daniel knew then. For some, another person's solitude is an invitation. And that stormy night, he had been the perfect target. The modern single-story wooden house stood in a sparsely populated residential area. The place was quiet to the point of being unsettling, where thick rows of pine trees brought a wild beauty but also served as a perfect wall shielding solitude. Mason, 25, had moved into the house in search of peace and privacy. He lived alone, worked freelance, and often reveled in the absolute silence. Although he didn't own a dog, the stillness of the house was brutally shattered one cold October night. It was past 11, night had blanketed everything, and the outside temperature had dropped close to freezing. Mason was watching a documentary, wrapped snugly in his blanket, feeling completely safe. Knock, knock. The sound of firm, deliberate knocking echoed through the house. Mason frowned. Who would come at this hour? In this remote neighborhood, it almost never happened. He peered through the peephole. A man stood at the doorstep. He was tall, wearing a beanie and a thick coat drenched with moisture. Rain or frost melt had matted his hair. His face bore an expression of utter exhaustion and a strange, desperate sadness. Mason hesitated, then unlatched the door and opened it just a crack. "Sorry to bother you this late," the man said, his voice low and raspy. "Have you seen a dog? A golden retriever around here? His name's Toby. He went missing a few hours ago. I've been searching everywhere." Mason glanced outside. The porch and front yard were completely empty. "No," Mason answered calmly. "I'm sorry. Haven't seen any dog around here." The man shook his head, his eyes brimming with painful disappointment. "Oh, I thought I saw him run this way." "You're sure? He's all I've got. You've been home all night, right?" That last question felt like an intrusion. "Yes, I've been home. Haven't seen a dog. Good luck finding him." Mason shut the door. He locked the deadbolt, then slid on the chain. Returning to the living room, he tried to shake the unease. Just a desperate pet owner, he told himself. 15 minutes passed. Mason settled back into his documentary, trying to relax. Knock, knock, knock. This time the knocking was harder, more urgent. Mason sighed, stood, and checked the peephole again. The same man. He looked even more soaked and haggard than before. Mason unlatched the chain and cracked the door. "I found him, Toby. I swear I saw him come off the road and run straight into your backyard. I saw it clear as day." The man's voice was pleading. "Please, I just need to cut through your house. If I go around outside, over the fence, I'll scare him and he'll bolt. Just let me through the back door so I can call him." Every instinct in Mason screamed. His backyard had no tall fences. The man could easily walk around if he really wanted. And Mason didn't own a dog, never had. The backyard was the most private part of his home. The man's desperation no longer sounded genuine. It carried a forced, calculated tone. "I'm sorry," Mason said firmly. "I can't let a stranger into my house at this hour. Like I said, I haven't seen any dog. Maybe he just ran through and into the woods. You should call the police or an animal rescue team." The man looked up at Mason. In that moment, his eyes lost all desperation, replaced by sudden coldness, raw, threatening. "I need my dog," the man said, each word heavy. "You have to understand, it's not safe out there." Mason closed the door without another word. Click. He locked the bolt and slid the chain back in place. Stepping back, he stared at the door, heart pounding violently. He heard footsteps. The man wasn't knocking anymore. He was running off the porch. Not fleeing, circling. Mason rushed to the kitchen, where a large window looked out over the backyard. He had to see. There the man was, moving around the house through the dark garden. He wasn't looking at the ground for a dog. He was heading straight for Mason's back porch. And then he stopped. He stood right at the glass door leading outside. His eyes locked directly onto Mason. He had found him. He saw Mason standing there in the dim kitchen light. The man pressed his face against the glass, distorted by the cold pain and faint glow. The twisted image of his face was the most horrifying sight Mason had ever seen. Then he started pounding on the door. Not knocking, pounding. Bam, bam, bam. The violent blows rattled the frame of the glass door. "Open up," the man roared, his voice stripped of all weariness or pleading. Now it was filled with rage and possession. "I know my dog's in there. You're hiding him. Open the door." The pretense was gone. He had shifted from manipulation to raw threat. Mason backed away, trembling, fumbling for his phone. He couldn't speak. It felt like a nightmare he couldn't wake from. 911. As Mason tried to stammer out his address, the pounding continued, relentless, furious. The man didn't care about being caught. He just wanted in. "Please. There's a man trying to break in, backyard, pounding on the glass. He says he's looking for his dog." Only when Mason heard the distant wail of police sirens cutting through the night did the man finally stop. He glared through the glass one last time, a chilling, wordless promise in his eyes, before turning and vanishing into the dark woods. The police arrived, searched the backyard and woods, but found no one. They took Mason's statement, noting the lost dog ruse and the man's escalating aggression. They concluded it was a failed burglary attempt. Mason knew better. It was psychological intrusion disguised under a perfect excuse. A week later, the horror became undeniable. Eliza, a neighbor 2 blocks away who also lived alone, reported a strange man trying to get inside her house, asking about a lost dog. She had called the police, and he left. But 2 nights later, she wasn't as lucky as Mason. Local news spread quickly. Eliza had gone missing. Police found her house broken into. No signs of violence, no screams, only a back door forced open, and a dog leash lying on the rug. The leash didn't belong to any dog in the neighborhood. Mason read the article word by word, his stomach twisting. The man had never been looking for a dog. The leash was a prop, a tool to build a desperate scenario. He had tested Mason first, to see if he was gullible or vulnerable. When Mason refused, he moved on to Eliza. Mason had narrowly escaped a nightmare fate. He realized he hadn't just shut the door on a trespasser. He had shut the door on a predator who used empathy for a lost pet as the perfect key to unlock strangers' homes. It was the most terrifying night of October in Portland, Oregon. A sudden winter storm had swept in, turning the quiet suburbs into a battlefield of howling winds and pounding rain. 16-year-old Caleb was home alone. His parents were stranded outside the city, stuck by icy highways and local flooding. They had called him repeatedly, their voices crackling through the unstable phone connection, reminding him to lock every door and window. Caleb tried to act strong, but the solitude inside the sprawling two-story wooden house, cloaked in darkness and storm roars, was an unbearable weight. He had checked every window, the front door, and the sliding glass door at the back, at least 3 times. He had latched every lock and even wedged chairs against places that felt vulnerable. Now he curled up on the leather sofa downstairs, the only light coming from the TV streaming non-stop weather updates and the flashes of lightning slicing through the curtains. Everything was just wind, rain, and branches clashing, until another sound broke through. Knock, knock, knock. A sharp, deliberate knock, cutting through the storm's chaos. It came from the front door. Caleb froze. His heart slammed against his ribs. Who would be outside in this storm? It couldn't be a neighbor. They were all locked away in their homes. He held his breath, listening. The knock didn't come again. Forcing himself up, Caleb tiptoed across the creaking wooden floor and peered through the peephole. Rain had smeared across the lens. He saw nothing, only chaotic darkness and the porch light swaying violently in the wind. He hesitated. Maybe it was the wind, or a branch, but the urge to check was overwhelming. With reckless courage, Caleb undid the latch and pulled the door open. Wind and rain slapped him in the face. He scanned the porch quickly. No one. The walkway was a mess of water and scattered leaves. He was about to slam the door shut, cursing himself for being paranoid, when his eyes caught something on the wooden porch floor, just beyond the doormat. The rain had washed the porch clean, stripping away mud and dirt. But right there, half a meter from the door, was a footprint, a clear muddy shoe print, fresh, dark, not yet washed away by the storm, pointed straight toward the house. Someone had been standing right there, knocking, and disappeared within seconds. The chill didn't come from the storm, it came from terror rising in his chest. Caleb slammed the door shut and threw every lock back into place. Whoever that was, he wasn't a lost mailman. He was a stalker, and he knew Caleb was home alone. Caleb bolted back to the sofa, curling tight, his breath ragged. He stared at his phone, ready to dial 911, but hesitated. What would he say? A footprint? He needed clearer proof. Fatigue and the storm's steady roar eventually overpowered his raw fear. Around 1 a.m., Caleb drifted off, still fully clothed. He awoke suddenly, wide awake. The storm still raged outside, but something subtle had shifted in the soundscape. Something foreign had woven itself into the noise. He listened, every nerve on edge. Then he heard it creak, a single sound, a heavy footstep, and it wasn't from downstairs, not from the hallway. It was directly above him. Caleb's bedroom was right upstairs. That sound wasn't the house settling. It was the slow weight of a heavy boot moving across bare floorboards in his room. Terror shot through him like electricity. Someone had gotten inside. They had slipped in while he slept, and now they were in the most private part of his home. No thought, no hesitation. Instinct screamed one command. Hide. Caleb slid off the sofa and darted into the small half-bath tucked under the staircase. It was the smallest room, windowless. He closed the door as silently as he could, but didn't lock it, just let it rest against the frame. No click, no sound. He stood in the dark, shaking, clutching his phone. He dialed 911. Police, I'm home alone. Someone's in my house. I'm hiding in the bathroom. Downstairs. His whisper cracked with fear. Can you describe the sounds? Where are they now? The dispatcher asked. Footsteps, upstairs, in my bedroom. I heard the floor creak. Just one person. I think they came in through the sliding door. Even as he whispered, the sounds shifted. Creak. This time from the stairs. Slow, deliberate, one step at a time. Panic burned away all sense of cold. The intruder was coming down. He had finished checking upstairs. Now he was descending. The footsteps grew louder, closer. Caleb pressed himself into the bathroom corner. Hand clamped over his mouth. The final step hit the floor with a solid thud. Silence. The intruder was in the living room, maybe staring at the empty sofa Caleb had just left. Then, footsteps again. Slow, circling the living room, heading toward the kitchen, then turning, coming back toward the stairs, toward the bathroom. Creak. Closer. Right outside. The footsteps stopped. Caleb could hear the man breathing. The faint rustle of clothes. He was standing right there, separated only by a thin wooden door. Caleb could feel his presence, still, heavy, suffocating. Did he know Caleb was inside? Was he waiting? The man lingered for a horrifying moment. Then, finally, footsteps resumed. Creak. He walked past, toward the kitchen. He had spared Caleb. Caleb exhaled shakily. He didn't know why the man had walked away. But he had. Then, crack. A faint metallic snap and the tinkling of glass. From the back of the house. The sliding door being forced. The dispatcher's voice returned. Louder. Urgent. We're at the corner. Unlock the front door as soon as you can. When Caleb heard police sirens scream and headlights sweep across the window, he crawled out of the bathroom. He didn't dare open the door. What if the intruder was still there? Instead, he heard pounding fists. Bang. 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 Police. They broke the door down. Officers stormed in, guns raised. They found Caleb crouched at the bottom of the stairs. Where is he? One shouted. The sliding door. He forced it open. They rushed to the back. The door was cracked ajar. The lock splintered. Wind and rain blasted inside. The intruder was gone, swallowed by the storm, his escape cloaked in wind and water. All that remained were muddy shoeprints trailing into the backyard. When Caleb's parents returned the next morning, they found the front door broken and their son trembling, recounting everything. The true horror wasn't just the broken lock. It was knowing that after Caleb opened the door the first time, the stalker knew for certain he was home alone. He had waited until the storm covered his movements, waited until Caleb slept, and the single footstep in the upstairs bedroom wasn't random. It was deliberate, a slow greeting, proof that he had invaded Caleb's most private space. What haunted Caleb most wasn't the pounding knock. It was that moment when the man stood silently outside the bathroom door, knowing someone was inside, and chose to walk away. Not mercy, but cruelty. He was playing a game, cat and mouse, turning Caleb's home into a prison of fear. And Caleb would never forget, on that stormy night, a man had walked through his life, and he had survived only because of a tiny bathroom and the desperate courage to call 911. The two-story house in the quiet suburbs of Dallas, Texas, always carried an illusion of safety. Ethan's parents put a lot of trust in that neighborhood. On one Friday night, that trust was put to the test. Ethan was 10 years old, and his little brother, Leo, was 7. Their parents had gone to a gala downtown, promising they'd be back before midnight. At first, the solitude felt like an adventure. Ethan and Leo munched on popcorn, watched TV, and played video games. By around 8 o'clock, the outside world had gone completely dark, leaving only the pale yellow glow of the street lamp filtering through the curtains. A pleasant sense of calm wrapped around the house. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. Ding dong. The sharp chime echoed through the silence. Both boys froze. Ethan looked at Leo. Leo stared back, his wide, innocent eyes full of uncertainty. "Who is it?" Leo whispered. "I don't know," Ethan answered. "Mom said never open the door for anyone." Their parents never had visitors at this hour. Neither did the neighbors. The doorbell rang again, this time faster. harsher. A series of urgent, impatient knocks followed, pounding against the wood. Ethan stood up and walked slowly toward the front door, his heartbeat quickening. Then he heard a voice, loud and raspy, calling from outside. "Hey, anybody home? Girl Scout cookies here." Ethan and Leo exchanged a look. Girl Scout cookies? At 8 o'clock on a Friday night? In the dark? That was strange. The cookie season had ended long ago. And Girl Scouts never sold alone. They always came in groups, with adults supervising. "Don't open it." Leo tugged on Ethan's shirt. "It's not real." Ethan moved closer to the heavy steel door. He pressed his eye to the peephole. The distorted view was clear enough. A grown man stood alone on the porch. He was tall, wearing a dark jacket, his expression neither friendly nor cheerful. Most telling of all, he wasn't holding any boxes of cookies. He was staring straight at the peephole. Straight at Ethan, as if he knew the boy was watching. "Please, I know you kids are home." The man's voice grew tenser. "Just 1 minute. I just want to ask if you're interested in some thin mints." This wasn't the tone of a salesman. It was the tone of someone demanding attention. Ethan stepped back, his stomach twisting into knots. Had Dad locked the door before leaving? He usually did. Right then, the man outside grabbed the doorknob. Creak. The brass handle twisted hard. Both boys heard it. The door rattled slightly in its frame. And Ethan realized the horrifying truth. Their parents had forgotten to lock the deadbolt. Terror shot through him like ice water, replaced by a surge of adrenaline. Ethan was no longer just a 10-year-old boy, he was the protector. He lunged forward. The man was still jiggling the knob. Trying to force it, Ethan's hand found the deadbolt. He twisted it with all his strength. Clack. The metallic snap of the lock slamming shut thundered through the house. Instantly, the rattling stopped. Silence. The man outside knew. He knew someone was inside. And he knew the door had just been locked. Ethan and Leo backed away, staring at the door. Neither of them dared breathe. The salesman didn't ring again. He didn't knock. The silence was heavier than before, broken only by the faint whistle of the wind outside. Then Ethan heard it. Footsteps. The man had moved, leaving the porch, headed toward the living room windows. The living room had 2 wide windows covered only by thin sheer curtains. From outside, the glow of the lamps made the interior easy to see. Ethan grabbed Leo's hand and pulled him away from view. The man pressed against the glass. From their hiding spot, Ethan could make out part of his silhouette through the curtains. He wasn't knocking on the glass. He was just standing there, watching. His stillness was more terrifying than violence. And then Ethan saw it. When the man shifted slightly under the streetlight, something metallic glinted at his waist. Heavy, short, unmistakable. A gun. He hadn't come to sell cookies. He had come to hunt. Ethan's throat tightened, panic clawing at his chest. That gun was undeniable proof of his intent. Ethan pulled Leo close, whispering, his voice taut and broken. "Leo, you need to do exactly what I say. It's a game. Hide and seek." "But, who's the seeker?" Leo asked, trembling. "Doesn't matter. You go to the basement. All the way to the back corner by the heater. Don't make a sound. Not one." Absolute silence. Leo, though terrified, could hear the seriousness in his brother's tone. Together, they crept toward the kitchen, where the basement door was tucked away behind a small cabinet. Ethan pulled the door open and pushed his brother toward the stairs. "You stay there until I call. Don't answer anyone. Only me. Do you understand? Only me." Leo nodded, pale-faced. He slipped into the dark stairwell. Ethan shut the door and nudged the cabinet back into place, partially concealing it. When Ethan turned, the figure was still at the window, his shadow pinned against the curtains. Ethan darted to the kitchen phone. His hand trembled as he dialed 911. "Police. There's a man outside my house. He has a gun. He tried to get in. My parents aren't home." He spoke quickly, forcing his voice to stay calm. The dispatcher asked for the address and details. Ethan gave them, eyes glued to the window, praying the man wouldn't notice the faint change in light or sound. As the dispatcher assured him officers were on their way, Ethan realized something. The man was no longer at the window. Where had he gone? Another window? The back door? Waiting in the dark? 10 endless minutes dragged by. Ethan stood frozen, a kitchen knife clenched in his hand, straining to hear. Then, the distant roar of engines. Flashing red and blue lights swept across the curtains. The piercing wail of sirens split the silence. Ethan heard tires screech, car doors slam. Had the man already fled? Ethan peeked once more through the peephole. 2 police officers stood on the porch, hands on their holsters. They scanned the area, circled the house, then knocked firmly. "Police. Kid, you okay in there?" Ethan unlatched the door. After confirming his safety, the officers began to inspect the house. "You did the right thing locking that door, son," one said. "Are you sure you saw a gun?" "I'm sure." On his belt, he said cookies, but he had no cookies. The second officer leaned close to the lock, shining a flashlight. When he turned back, his expression was grave. "The lock's been tampered with. Tool marks." He tried to pick it before he knocked. The final truth hit Ethan. The man hadn't knocked because he wanted to sell cookies. He'd knocked because he couldn't get the door open. He wanted Ethan to unlock it for him. Police later found fresh muddy shoe prints on the front walkway. The nighttime cookie salesman had vanished into the shadows of suburbia, thwarted by just seconds. Ethan rushed to the basement, calling for Leo. His brother burst into tears and threw his arms around him. Ryan, 23, freshly graduated from college, lived alone in a 2-story house in Phoenix, Arizona, where silence was both a gift and a burden. His parents had moved overseas for work, leaving him with absolute freedom and undeniable loneliness. The spacious house, built in Spanish style with stucco walls and a tiled roof, always had a few dark corners and long hallways that Ryan never felt comfortable walking through once night fell. That afternoon, Arizona's dry, blazing sunlight filled the backyard. Ryan was shooting hoops on his small concrete court. It was a familiar routine, the steady bounce of the ball, the squeak of the rim. Sweat poured down his face. His mind focused entirely on the ball's arc. He launched a 3-pointer from far out. The ball soared, spinning, then clanged off the rim and smacked against the house wall. Ryan looked up to see where the ball bounced. That was when his eyes accidentally stopped at the upstairs window of the unused bedroom. That room was rarely touched, used mostly for storage. Its sliding glass window was shut. But framed in that glass, Ryan saw a figure. It was a woman. She was standing right behind the glass, staring straight down at the court. Her face was obscured by the harsh sunlight, but her tall, thin shape and matted black hair were unmistakable. She stood there, motionless, watching Ryan. Ryan's whole body went cold. He froze, the basketball dropping lifelessly onto the grass. Who was she? How had she gotten in? For one long, horrifying second, Ryan locked eyes with her. And then, as he stared directly, she slipped away instantly, like a snake retreating into the shadows. She vanished from view. The image had lasted only a fraction of a second, but it was sharp, undeniable. Ryan's heart pounded against his ribs. He wasn't imagining it. He had seen her. He bolted into the house, abandoning the basketball without a thought. He checked every door, the front door, the garage door, the sliding door to the patio, all locked. He went straight upstairs, the fear becoming sharper with every step. The hallway was silent. Sunlight filtered through a window, turning floating dust particles into golden illusions. He reached the unused bedroom. He pushed the door open. Empty. No one. The curtains were tied back as usual. The sliding window was closed and latched. Ryan stepped inside. He checked under the bed, inside the closet, behind the curtains. Nothing. No signs of disturbance. No foreign objects. No scent. The room was completely bare, except for a wooden desk and a few old cardboard boxes. He went back downstairs, checked the kitchen. He checked every window. He checked the basement. Everything closed. Everything locked. Ryan returned to the backyard, inspecting the patio. The sliding door there was the easiest point of entry. He checked the lock again. Engaged. If she had escaped, she must have done it in the few seconds when he had rushed inside, and she must have used the back door. But to do that, she would have had to unlock it. Ryan tried to rationalize. Maybe he had forgotten to lock the back door. Maybe she had seized the chance, slipped in, and when Ryan ran inside, she had darted back out within seconds, shutting the door but leaving it unlocked. He locked the back door again, sliding the steel bolt into place, even though he had searched everywhere and given himself a logical explanation. A chill clung to Ryan. The absence of any trace of entry was even more frightening, as if she had been a phantom, appearing only to carve a scar in his mind before vanishing. Night fell. Ryan had dinner, watched TV, drank a glass of water. He checked all the doors a fourth time. He went upstairs, into his master bedroom. It was the only place he felt safe, with its window facing the main road. He shut the door, latched it, and went to sleep. It was 2 a.m. Ryan drifted into deep sleep. His dreams were disturbed by blurred images of the woman's face in the window. Then, a sound woke him, not loud, just a dry rustling, like fabric brushing against wood. Ryan's eyes snapped open. The room was pitch black. The only light came from the red glow of his digital alarm clock. He lay still, listening. Rustle, louder this time. The sound came from directly beneath his bed. Ryan's back went ice cold. The hairs on his neck stood straight up. Terror froze every muscle in his body. It wasn't creaking wood. It wasn't a house noise. It was the sound of a person shifting in a cramped space. Then, the mattress beneath Ryan sagged slightly, as if a weight had pressed against it. Ryan realized she hadn't escaped through the back door. She had waited. She had hidden in one of the last places anyone would check, under his bed. The realization cut into his mind like a blade. She had been lying there, listening to his breathing, waiting for the perfect moment. No time to think, no time to scream. A pale, skeletal arm suddenly reached out from beneath the bed. Not toward him, toward the nightstand, where Ryan kept his phone and flashlight. That movement snapped Ryan's final thread of fear. She didn't just want to steal. She wanted to cut him off from communication. Ryan acted instantly. He rolled off the bed, hitting the opposite side of the floor. In that moment, the woman emerged. She didn't crawl. She rose out from under the bed. Slow, almost silent. She was disturbingly tall, her tangled black hair wild. Her eyes locked wide on Ryan. Her face was ghostly pale, her chin smeared with dirt, like a specter birthed from the dark. She said nothing. She only stared. Ryan scrambled up, backing into the wall. She advanced, not rushing, but with terrifying certainty. Ryan screamed, a raw, instinctive cry distorted by horror. He lunged at her, not to strike, but to pin her down. Her body was unexpectedly light for her frame, but unnervingly strong. She fought like an animal, clawing and shoving. Her nails were sharp, raking his arms. They grappled in the dark, bodies slamming against the wooden floor and furniture. Harsh breaths, her guttural snarls, and Ryan's frantic shouts created a nightmare symphony in the night. Driven by panic and youth, Ryan finally managed to pin her to the floor. He gripped her wrists, pressing his knee against her chest. "Get out," Ryan roared. "Get out of my house." The woman only choked out incoherent sounds, her wild eyes staring blankly at the dark ceiling. The violence stopped abruptly when another sound broke through. Bang, bang, bang. Fists hammered on the downstairs door. "Anyone in there? Police are on the way." It was Mr. Peterson, the elderly widower next door. He had heard the screams and come to help. Ryan shouted back, his throat raw. "Stranger in the house. Call the police. She's in here." In that moment, the woman under Ryan suddenly stopped struggling. She let out a long, pained exhale and went limp. Minutes later, sirens wailed. Ryan held her down, trembling, until two officers stormed into the bedroom with flashlights and guns drawn. They subdued the woman instantly. Ryan released her, stumbling back, drenched in cold sweat. She was led outside, not resisting, muttering nonsense. Once the chaos settled, Ryan was taken to the hospital for his injuries. Police stayed behind to investigate. They identified the woman. Her name was Karen, 31. She had no connection to Ryan. She was a homeless drug addict with a history of mental illness and petty theft. Police found an empty lighter and a bloody syringe in her coat pocket. The most horrifying truth was confirmed. Karen had slipped into the house through a basement window that hadn't been locked properly while Ryan was outside playing basketball. When he went upstairs to check the empty bedroom, she had gone straight into his master bedroom, slid under his bed, and stayed hidden in the darkness for over 8 hours. She hadn't broken in to steal. She only wanted shelter, a dark and warm place. But when Ryan went to sleep, his presence became a temptation, or a threat, to her fractured mind. Elias had been searching for silence. 5 years ago, he left behind the chaos of the city and retreated to a remote spot deep in the woods of upstate New York. His cabin was a rustic wooden structure nestled among thick maples and pines. Here, solitude was absolute. The nearest neighbor was miles away. The only sounds were the wind hissing through the leaves and, occasionally, the hoot of an owl. Elias loved it. It was the perfect place to fish, read, and forget the world. That peace began to fracture about 2 weeks ago. Elias was sitting on the wide porch overlooking the forest. Twilight had faded, and darkness was swallowing everything. He was sipping a cold beer when he suddenly heard a branch snap somewhere in the distance. It was a sharp, unnatural sound. He didn't think much of it. The woods were full of wildlife. Maybe it was a deer. Maybe a raccoon. After years of living there, Elias was used to noises like that. He shrugged it off. But the sound didn't stop. The next day, another branch broke. This time, a little closer. On the third night, it happened twice. A pattern was forming, one Elias didn't want. As the days passed, the noises grew more frequent. They weren't random anymore. First came the snapping of branches. Then the crunch of dry leaves underfoot. And eventually, faint scratching sounds. One night, the scratching grew clearer. It came from the side of the house, very close to the spare bedroom window. Elias sat upright, his heart beating faster than normal. He held his breath and listened. The scratching stopped. Silence. He told himself it was a squirrel or a mole. But it didn't feel right. He stood, went inside, locked the porch door, and latched every window. The following night, the scratching returned. This time, it wasn't just scratching. Elias was lying in bed, trying to read. The scratches began, slow, steady. Then they shifted into faint tapping. Tap, tap, as if someone was touching the window glass with their fingernails. Not banging, but deliberate, calculated. He knows I'm here, Elias thought. His heart skipped. He jumped from the bed, grabbed a flashlight, and crept down the dark hallway toward the spare bedroom. Fear was no longer worry, it was certainty of a threat. He reached the window, tugged the thin curtain aside. He shined the flashlight outside. The yellow beam cut through the darkness. Nothing. No person. No animal. Only black tree trunks and weak moonlight casting eerie shadows across the grass. He shook his head, telling himself his imagination had gone too far. Maybe a branch tapping against the glass. Maybe the wind. He reassured himself. But the fear lingered. The air felt thick, heavy, as if an unseen presence was pressing down on him. He returned to bed but couldn't sleep. Every small sound was amplified. Every creak of the floorboards echoed like footsteps sneaking inside. He lay awake, listening, until exhaustion finally overtook him. The nights that followed were no better. The sounds didn't stop. Elias heard them every night, the tapping, the scratching. Sometimes, he swore he heard a faint whisper, as if from inside the walls themselves. He tried to ignore it, but his grip on control was slipping. He realized something was toying with him. Whatever was out there knew he was inside, and it was waiting. One night, he decided to confront it. He took a crowbar from the shed. He told himself maybe it was just an animal that had found its way in. Maybe a raccoon trapped inside. He had to check. He walked to the spare bedroom and carefully opened the door. The air inside was stale, heavy. The room hadn't been used in months. He swept the flashlight slowly across the walls. Under the bed, behind the wardrobe, nothing, empty. He felt foolish. But as he turned to leave, the flashlight caught a detail. The closet door was slightly ajar. Elias's stomach tightened. He was sure he had left it closed. He stepped closer and pulled it open. The closet was empty, but when he aimed the light deep into the back corner, he saw something strange. A small, dark scrap of torn fabric, snagged on the wall's edge. It looked like a piece of old clothing. His breath caught in his throat. His thoughts raced. Someone had been here. Maybe not now, but at some point. Someone had hidden inside, and if this scrap was proof, then they had been lurking in his home. Elias backed out of the room, heart pounding painfully. He slammed the door shut and locked it. He couldn't stay another second. He stepped outside, breathing the cold air. The forest darkness pressed in, closing around him. He tried to tell himself it was just an old scrap left behind by his parents. But reason couldn't erase the dread. He knew the isolation was becoming too much. That night, he slept on the couch with a baseball bat within reach. But nothing happened. No scratching, no tapping. The silence was almost worse. The next night, Elias steeled himself. He would sleep in his bed. He wouldn't let anything drive him from his own house. Just as he was drifting off, it came back. Tap, tap, tap. At the window. Faster, sharper. He jolted upright, snatched the flashlight. This time, he didn't care about noise. He ran straight to the spare bedroom. He yanked the curtain aside. The flashlight beam cut across the glass. He didn't just see the woods. He saw a figure. A tall, dark shape standing directly outside the window. Barely visible in the dim glow. Motionless, staring at the very window he had just looked through. His blood froze. His entire body went cold. Who were they? What were they doing here? There was no doubt anymore. Someone had been outside his cabin. Someone had been inside, and they had been watching him. He ran for the phone and dialed 911. His hands shaking so badly he could barely press the numbers. He whispered into the receiver, his voice strangled by panic. "Someone's outside my house. I think they're still here." He gave the address. The dispatcher told him officers were on the way. He hung up, scanning the room. He had to leave. He couldn't stay. As he turned to grab his coat, he heard it, a slow creak from the hallway. Someone was inside the house. This time, Elias didn't hesitate. He bolted for the back door, threw it open, and plunged into the woods. He ran as fast as he could, lungs burning, never daring to look back. When he reached the edge of his property, he saw the flashing red and blue lights of police cars in the distance. Slowing, trembling, he hid behind a tree and watched. He saw the officers storm into his cabin, guns raised, searching. He didn't stay to find out what they discovered. He didn't need to know who, or what, had been there. He only knew one thing. The cabin was no longer safe. Elias never returned. He kept up with the news. Let the police know he was safe. His cabin still stands, alone in the woods,